Welcome to Miniatures Rundown. I'm Kevin, and today we're putting on our hazmat gear and diving deep into the Garden of Nurgle. We're going to pick apart each battle trait, spell, artifact, and war scroll, and see which one of them can find their place in your Maggotkin army. While each war scroll ability is not created equal, there are certainly some winners and a few losers in the tome. My goal is to try and highlight the best each has to offer. Sometimes people find diamonds in the rough, and of course, over the life of the tome, things change and models find new life. Okay, so we're going to first talk about the battle traits for Maggotkin and what those bring to the table for this army. There's been a few changes and a few things operate quite a bit differently if you are familiar with the previous battle tome and the index. So going into it, first battle trait we have is Blighted Regrowth. So this is where your Feculent Narwhals come into play. And Feculent Narwhals have seen a big upgrade in what they're capable of in this tome. This allows you to bring them back if they're destroyed. You can bring them back within 12 inches of an objective that you control, or with more than 3 inches from enemy units and other terrain features. So really, like, this allows you, even if your opponent has destroyed your Feculent Narwhal. And the thing that's interesting about faction terrain in AOS is that oftentimes it ends up being a charge vector or a target for your enemy. So sometimes it can be a liability, and a Feculent Narwhal kind of wants to be closer to the enemy than you would normally want your terrain feature to be. But this means it's way less of a liability because you can just bring it back. And this just happens in your hero phase. You don't have to do anything. It doesn't cost anything. So you just bring back a Narwhal. As long as there are no other friendly Feculent Narwhals on the battlefield. So there are ways to have multiples. So if you have multiples, you can both of them had to be destroyed in order to take advantage of this ability. But you'll never be without a tree, which is nice. Then we have Blessed by the Plague Father. This is basically how you give out and spread disease. So functionally, at the end of any turn, and that includes your turn and the opponent's turn, you get to pick an enemy within 7 inches of a Maggotkin of Nurgle unit that's not a manifestation or terrain feature. And if it is in combat with the Maggotkin unit, it just gets the disease keyword, which interacts with a lot of things further in the tome and further in the battle traits. So this is a way, and also at distance, you can, on a 4-up, it also gives the disease keyword. So really, you don't even have to be right in base contact or within combat to give out disease anymore, which is what you used to have to do. Now, even at a 7-inch range, because 7, Nurgle, etc., you can give out the disease keyword, which is really handy. And it also gives you 2 options. So you can spread, so you can pick a disease enemy unit to be the target. Each other enemy unit within the target's combat range can have a disease keyword, which is really handy. So you can spread disease, basically hand out disease to a unit and then spread it, which is very thematic and also really useful. Then you can mutate. So this is where it really starts to get crazy, because if all enemy units on the battlefield have the disease keyword, each one of those takes 1 mortal wound. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but if you think about all the enemy units on the board having the disease keyword, or armies that don't have a whole lot of units to begin with, like thinking like Gargants, for instance, you can just give them the disease keyword. Now you're starting to do some chip damage automatically at the end of each turn, which includes your turn and the opponent's turn. Then, in the theme of dealing disease at the end of any turn, racked with disease, you pick each diseased enemy unit to be the target. So regardless of how many are diseased, it just each one ends up being the target of this, and they take D3 mortal damage. So once again, this is at the end of any turn. So this is yours or the opponent's turn. So this is D3 damage at the end of any of both player turns, which is combined, if you can manage to get mutate off as well, like that's D3 plus 1 damage at the end of every turn. Now, the likelihood of you actually getting disease on every enemy unit is probably pretty slim, unless you're really leaning into it, or it's kind of a win more condition. But regardless, it's still really strong that you no longer have a chance to fail doing damage to a diseased unit, which you used to be able to do in the index, because it was on a dirty D3 basically. Next, we have Ceaseless Infections. So you pick an enemy unit that was in combat with a Rotbringer unit that was destroyed. So Rotbringers are basically the mortals in this book. And if a enemy unit destroyed a Rotbringer during that turn, you can't pick a manifestation or terrain. That's kind of a theme, like your manifestation or terrain doesn't count towards doing a lot of this stuff. On a 3+, the target has a disease keyword. So what basically this translates to is if your opponent charges in, destroys a unit of your Pestigores, they explode and make it diseased, and make the charging unit diseased, which is really great. And disease is pretty hardy. It still is healed. We're going to get to it, but it's still healed in the same way that it was previously. It's a little bit clearer on how it works, but it's also a really good trick to have to prevent healing as well. Burst pustules. This came about later in the index, and now it's just part of the tome, where if a diseased enemy is destroyed before the last model is removed, roll a dice on a 3+, you pick another enemy unit within 9 inches of that destroyed enemy, and it becomes diseased. And once again, can't be a manifestation or a terrain feature. So you kill something that's diseased, and this is just passive. So even if something dies when it's racked with disease or when the disease mutates, it still can spread that disease to a unit within 9. And 9's pretty hefty amount. So it's a good way to get diseases on maybe a character that's harder to reach, or a unit that is trying to avoid getting diseased. So I think that these are really it's just a great build, and it's all built in, so you don't have to. It's not tied to your battle formations, so you get to just do all these things as part of playing Maggotkin, which is really handy. And then the very last is Desperate Remedies, which is how your opponent was going to remove disease. So basically, if an ability would heal or return models to a unit, that instead of healing or returning a model, it removes a disease keyword, which means that that ability is then stopped. So if someone attempts to rally, then instead of rallying, they lose disease. So really powerful way to stop some recursion, and a lot of factions have ways of bringing models back. Looking at death specifically, this is a really great way to stop those mechanics from snowballing into something that is difficult to handle. Next, we go into battle formations. So there's 4 battle formations, pretty similar to what you would see in any other battle tome. The first one that I want to talk about is probably my favorite, which is the Maggotkin of Nurgle. And this one has a lot of text, but what it boils down to is you get to pick an enemy unit in the deployment phase to be the plague progenitor. So they're already kind of infected. They're a little sniffly. They're not feeling great. But what that means is you pick an enemy unit on the battlefield on a 2d3 or on a 6, or if the roll equals or exceeds the plague progenitor's health characteristic, it's diseased. So in the first battle round, while the plague progenitor is diseased, it cannot be used or picked to be the target of any abilities that could heal or return slain models to it. So basically, in the first battle round, that if it's diseased, it cannot be healed from that disease. So, and then from that point on, for the rest of the battle, so plague progenitor lasts for the entirety of the battle. So where the last paragraph of this comes in is that each time the plague progenitor is picked to be the target of the spread effect of the Blessed by the Plague Father ability, inflict D3 mortal damage on each other enemy unit within its combat range, excluding manifestations and terrain features as usual, in addition to the effect of that ability. So Blessed by the Grandfather, if you ping them, they take damage anyway, and it's just really, Taliban is really strong, and it gets your disease dirty snowball kind of rolling early, which is really nice. Then we move on to the other ones, much shorter in text, much more simple in mechanics. Plague Cyst, you add 5 to control scores of non-hero Rotbringer units while they're wholly within 12 of any Maggotkin of Nurgle demon units. So basically, this is encouraging you to play with a mix of demons and mortals, and it improves the control score of the mortals. In my opinion, control score is not nearly as important as just removing the enemy's models from the table. So this one isn't huge, but if you're not planning on doing a whole lot of damage and just standing on the circles, this might help you edge out in the overall score at the end of the game. Nurgle's Menagerie, Denizens of the Garden. Companion weapons have crit 2 hits. It's really straightforward. So Beasts of Nurgle, Plague Flies, various other mounts and stuff get crit 2 hits on their companion weapons, which it's fine. If you're playing with a lot of Beasts of Nurgle, or if you're playing with a lot of rot flies, and you're also playing with some monsters, this could be useful. But overall, it's kind of limited in what it's benefiting. So it really benefits you to lean into that as much as you can if you're going to play this battle formation. Affliction Cyst is the last one. Filth-laden demonic blooms. Each time you make a roll for a friendly non-monster Maggotkin of Nurgle demon unit, you can change that roll to a 4. A run roll. So this one is a little bit better than it sounds on the face, but because remember that redeploy is a run roll, so If you redeploy, you get to automatically at least go 4 inches. So that can be really handy for denying some charges or getting onto an objective that your opponent thought was out of reach. I think this one is actually a lot better than it might sound, and with the amount of text that it has belies. It also gives you a little bit more speed, because if you run, you're at least going 4 more inches, and a lot of the war scrolls in here are pretty slow, so that gives you a decent speed boost. Next, we're going to move on to the heroic traits. There are 3 of them to choose from. There's no way to get additional heroic traits, so you're pretty much stuck with choosing one. Unfortunately, I think that there's one that kind of just overshadows them all. So there's Grandfather's Blessing. At the end of any turn, if this unit is in combat with a diseased enemy unit, you heal D3. Pretty simple. A lot of the heroes in this book have a lot of wounds. This would be good on a Great Unclean one or on possibly a Lord of Affliction. But in general, healing D3, not bad, pretty handy. This is the one that I think that is probably takes the cake, because it's going to be pretty much always useful, is the Gift of Febile Frenzy. So you pick a visible, friendly, non-hero Maggotkin of Nurgle unit that's wholly within 12 to be the target. On a 3+, you add 1 to its attacks characteristic for its melee weapons. Really strong, especially when considering Rot Swords, even Plague Bearers. You really start stacking on some damage if you get Plague Bearers get more than 1 attack, because they have crit mortals. Well, we'll get into that when we get into Plague Bearers. But I think this is a really strong heroic trait, and it's really hard to go wrong with this one. The next one is also really good. I don't think it quite takes the place of Gift of Febile Frenzy, but it can be really strong. Overpowering Stench. You pick an enemy unit in combat with this unit to be the target. You and your opponent roll off. If your roll is higher, so basically 50-50 chance. You pick one of the following effects. You ignore positive modifiers of save rolls for the target, or subtract 1 from ward rolls. Both of those effects are really strong. However, it's basically a 50-50 chance it's even going to work, which is why I don't quite think this one overpowers a Gift of Febile Frenzy. Even though both of those effects are really strong, I just don't think that making it all your one heroic trait on a 50-50 chance is a good gamble. But it could be flavorful, and it could be a lot. And if it works really well. So don't let that necessarily scare you away. Just be aware that it's not the most reliable of abilities. Next, we're going to move on to the artifacts, the Boons of Nurgle. First up, we have the Witherstave. You pick an enemy unit that charged this turn is in combat with this unit to be the target. On a 3+, you subtract 1 from its damage. Really great against anything that has charge +1 damage. Really like softens that blow of those faster units that with lances that charge in. I'm thinking of Chaos Knights, or I'm thinking of Death Riders, or any mounted unit tends to have damage +1 on the charge. I think this is just a really good artifact, especially considering that Nurgle units tend to be slower. So you're often going to be the one receiving the charge. And a lot of things in this tome very much benefit from being the recipient of a charge. So I think that the Witherstave is a really good choice. The Carrion Dirge is a once per battle. So I'm not a big fan of once per battle artifacts unless their effect is really, really strong. I'm just not sure this is the one of those. But it does play well into modifying the control scores and making sure that you're controlling the circles. But that said, you pick up to 3 enemy units within 18 of this unit to be the target, and you subtract 5 from their control scores until the start of your next turn. I mean, there's a possibility that this could really keep your objectives under your control. However, it's only once per battle, and it doesn't require a roll. But if you combine this with the battle trait for Vectors of Contagion, the Plague Cyst, I think that maybe this could help solidify your hold on some objectives. I don't think it helps you do more. It definitely doesn't help you do more damage or necessarily win the game, but it will help you hold objectives. And then last but not least is, it might be least. It's not my favorite. Well, no, Carrion Dirge is not my favorite. This one is potentially really useful. The Rustfang. So you have to pick an enemy hero or monster in combat to be the target. So that means you have to get your hero into combat with another hero or monster, which is something you may or may not want to do. It kind of depends on the context. But it is any combat phase, and it's not once per battle. You subtract 1 from save rolls to a target for the rest of the turn. So just giving them a -1 to their save. I think that could be really strong. A Lord of Afflictions, who's really fast, could get in there and get into a hero that you're multi-charging with a couple other units and really put the hurt on. I think that the Rustfang could find a lot of use in that. My favorite is still the Witherstave. I think that Nurgle plays really well defensively, so but I'm willing to hear arguments for Rustfang. Let me know in the comments. Next, we're going to move on to the spell lore. So 3 spells, as usual. The 2 of them have a casting cost of 6, and 1 has a casting cost of 7. So not too hard to cast, and there are ways to bump up your casting in this tome. So don't let those casting values scare you off too much. The unlimited spell is Fleshy Abundance. So you pick a friendly Maggotkin of Nurgle unit wholly within 12 to the target, and this goes off on a 6. You can pick one of the following effects. Heal D3. Always good to have a healing spell. Always handy. Really never is not useful to have, especially when you have an army like Maggotkin who has a lot of wounds available to them. Or you can subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks that target that friendly unit until the start of your next turn. So it's -1. This is a really strong effect of this, is subtracting 1 from wound rolls for attacks. Now that's not just melee attacks. It also includes shooting attacks as well. So even if you're facing against KO, who typically wounds on 2s with their scariest guns, taking those wound rolls down to a 3 is a big buff in durability. And of course, if anything's wounding on 4s, taking that from a 4 to a 5 is huge. So I think that this spell, especially it being unlimited, is really, really strong. Crippling Despair, also a really good spell. This spell lore is very good. Crippling Despair goes off on a 6. You pick a visible enemy unit with an 18, and the target cannot use commands for the rest of the turn. That's incredibly strong. There are a lot of, and not just core commands, it's any command. So if they have War Scroll commands or commands in their tome, they can't use them until the end of the turn. So, no all-out defense, no all-out attack. No re-rolling charges. There's no auto run 6. There's a lot of really good ways to apply the spell and cripple your opponent. It's befitting the name, Crippling Despair. The next spell is cast on a 7, Cloying Quagmire. You pick a visible enemy unit with an 18, and like I said, it goes off on a 7. Until the start of your next turn, you have their move characteristic. And if the target has a save characteristic of 3 or better, you subtract 1 from run and charge rolls for that target. So once again, this is until the start of your next turn. So depending on what we're looking at as far as if you get a double turn or your opponent gets a double turn, you're able to keep this debuff on for longer. Having the move characteristic is crippling in some instances. Armies that already move slow, I'm thinking a lot of death armies, OBR and Soulblight, have a lot of units that only move 4, reducing that to 2. And of course, dwarves, or we're looking at 4-inch movement, reducing that down to 2 is huge. Really lessens the amount of threat your opponent can project. And then if their save is 3 or better, you subtract 1 from run and charge rolls. So that once again, I'm thinking of Hellsmiths of Heshut, who have a lot of 3-up saves, being able to subtract 1 from their run and charge rolls, keeping those models from getting into combat, or even just moving up the board effectively. Next, we're moving on to the prayer lore. The prayer lore is also really good. Nurgle really won out in terms of what they got in their tome. I really think that they're doing great, and these prayers and spells are no exception. So the first prayer is their unlimited prayer. The Gift of Disease goes off on a 3, which is a really great number for a prayer to go off of, especially an unlimited prayer, where you're more likely to use it more often across the battlefield and not have saved up prayer points ritual points in order to do it. So until the start of your next turn, you subtract 1 from wound rolls for attacks made by enemy units while they are in combat with the chanter. So they have to be in combat with the chanter, which means that you have to get your priest into combat. May not be where you want to be, but the priests that they have aren't the worst in combat. And if you're combining charges and combining combats, I think that's maybe not the worst place for one of your priests to be. Subtract 1 from wound rolls, and if it's a 10 or more, the enemy unit in combat with the chanter, it has a disease keyword. So if this goes off on a 10 or more, it hands out the disease keyword as well, which handing out the disease keyword is going to be the way that you do so much of your damage, so much chip damage, so much attrition that you can inflict with disease. This just plays into that. And of course, it being going off on a 3 and being unlimited means that you're going to get to take advantage of it quite often. Favored Poxes goes off on a 4. And then you pick a visible enemy unit within 18 inches to be the target. Until the start of your next turn, subtract 2 from charge rolls on the target. So if you can combine that with Cloying Quagmire, you can really like hamper somebody's ability to charge you. If it's a 10 plus, so 10 plus seems to be the number in which you get the powered up version of all these prayers. You subtract 1 from the number of dice rolled when making charges for the target to a minimum of 1 instead of the effect. So it's not -2, it's -1 dice, which is better in a lot of ways. Subtracting 1 dice often means that they're not going to make a charge. And I feel like this, I mean, going off on a 4, you're probably going to save ritual points to get the enhanced version of this. So you're going to get to do this maybe once or twice per game. Range of 18 means that you can really reach out and do it, which is handy. Oh, really good prayer. The last one here is Bloated with Sickness. Also goes off on a 4. You pick a non-monster Maggotkin of Nurgle unit within 12 inches of the Chanter wholly within 12 inches of the Chanter to be a target. Until the start of your next turn, you ignore the first point of damage. That's pretty handy. It's more useful in some contexts versus others. Like if an opponent can do damage in the hero phase, the shooting phase, charge phase, it can start to really add up how much damage you end up negating. On a 10 plus, you can pick another eligible unit to be a second target. This is another one where I think you're going to save up ritual points to get the enhanced effect. So you get to use it once or twice, but you'll use it on key turns where you know your opponent is doing their go turn, and you want to save just that little bit more damage. Thank you for joining us on this perilous journey. However, that's not all. Join us for the rest of the War Scrolls in Part 2. What's your thoughts on the new Slimy Maggotkin? Let us know in the comments. And if you like this content and want to see more, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks.